I go back. It took me a little bit to figure out exactly where this was happening. I ended up doing the.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Should we get started? Yeah.
Are you ready to get started? Morning. I call to order the City of Kansas City Planning Commission at 9:33 a.m. on November 16th, 2022. Mr. Weston, roll call please.
Sure. Commissioner Walters?
Here.
Copier, sorry.
Here.
Meyer?
Present.
Commissioner Tyson? I'm sorry, is it approved here?
Here's
Oh.
the wall.
Okay, Commissioner Tyson?
Yes.
Commissioner Bello?
I am here.
Chair Paulson?
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the matters before the Planning Commission today will be dealt with as a public hearing. The scheduled public hearing is itemized on the agenda. I will identify the subject, announce when the public hearing is open, and request anyone interested to state their feelings regarding the matter being considered. Failure to raise an issue in person, by Zoom, or by letter to the Planning Commission or the City Council precludes raising that issue at a subsequent time on appeal. If the Planning Commission decision is appealed, the Council may or may not allow new evidence. We may also name and address any other approval criteria you think apply to this decision. If you wish to speak for, against, or comment in any way, when I call for testimony, please identify yourself as wishing to speak. You can do this by raising your hand, physically or digitally, or typing your name in the chat box on Zoom. When called to speak, please give your name, address, and make your statement. The maximum time allotted for testimony shall be 3 minutes for individuals, 15 minutes for applicants and persons representing 4 or more persons, 10 minutes for applicants' rebuttal. If your testimony would be repetitious, but you would like the opportunity to appeal the decision, you must sign the hearing sign-in sheet located in the rear of this council chamber, or type your name in the chat box, or let staff know, and they will type your name in the chat box. Only those who have appeared before the Planning Commission in person, Zoom, or in writing shall be allowed to speak on appeal of this item to the City Council. Please note that unless there is a continuance of this hearing, if a participant so requests before the conclusion of the hearing, the record shall remain open for at least 7 days after the hearing. If the record remains open, such an extension shall not be subject to the so-called 120-day limit. I call to order the public hearing regarding case number LU-2022-01 at 9:36 a.m. Any members of the Planning Commission wish to abstain? Do any members of the Planning Commission wish to declare a conflict of interest? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Hearing none, any member of the audience wish to challenge any individual member of the Planning Commission? Hearing none, for all those wishing to testify, please be aware that if you fail to raise an issue in person, Zoom, or by letter today or to the Planning Commission, you will be unable to raise that issue at a subsequent item on appeal to the City Council or at a subsequent time on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria that staff will describe or other criteria in the Plan or Land Use Code which you believe apply to the decision. Failure to specifically address the approval criteria that staff will describe also precludes the raising of an issue related to those criteria on appeal. At this time, I call for the staff to present a proposal along with the applicable approval standards and make a recommendation.
Oh, okay. Is this on me? Am I mute? Okay. There we go. Okay, thank you. I don't know these in person in a long time, so you know, we're out of practice. Good morning. My name is Keith Lyden, and I'm the city planner, contract planner. Yes, I'm trying to get my. You have a staff report that I've prepared for you to review, and I'm not going to slog through all, whatever it was, 20-some pages, but I will go ahead and give you some of the highlights, and I'm assuming that the applicant who I see is online can provide some additional detail about the proposal. We have a subdivision that's proposed for 16 lots for residential use, plan development also to gain some flexibility in some of the design standards for the R25-4 zone that applies here. They're also asking for 5 variances, which I'll go into in a little while. Finally, a tree permit to cut down 7 trees as they develop the property. The property is located along Pacific Highway, just north of the Tuolumne River. It's on Versailles Road. You folks might be familiar with River's Edge subdivision. So it would be the vacant piece of property that's south of the TVF&R fire station and east of the BGE substation, and there's a cell phone tower there as well. The property's a little over an acre in size, and they're proposing 16 units, as I said. So Ronnie's got the subdivision proposed plat up there. So you can see they have the lots arranged, proposed to be arranged in a horseshoe fashion with a private driveway easement going around the perimeter of the site. You can see where you've got a dash line for a driveway that would be a two-way driveway that would intersect with Versailles Road in 2 places. And then Tract A is a proposed common open space. They have some space between the lots, the ones that are running north-south and the ones east-west, for pedestrian access, but you know, all of the units. And I'll let the applicant can provide some more detail there. Ronnie, if you could go to the next slide showing the proposed.
Closed it, and now I have to go find it.
All right. Well, I'll just continue. They're proposing attached single-family homes that would be on individual lots, they have 3 different house designs that are described in the application, but they're pretty similar in the idea. There are going to be 8 of the townhomes are proposed to have a 1-car garage, and the remaining ones are proposed to have the surface parking available. So there will be a total of 22 parking spaces altogether in the garages and the surface parking. And then the applicant proposes a 14,000 plus square foot common open space area. The variances, I'll get into in a little bit. We got comments from, there we go, there's the layout. So you can see that we've got, 5 units on each side going north-south, and then the remaining, 6 east-west. The ones that are oriented east-west would only have surface parking available to them. The ones on the north-south side, the larger ones, would have a garage. And then those 2 smaller units at the north end on each side would also have surface parking available. We received a number of agency comments, and those are either provided in the staff report, or in some cases, the applicant receives those ahead of time. They're in the application. The review agencies were comfortable with the proposal. ODOT recommended that a 6-foot wide sidewalk be provided along there at the 99W frontage on the east side. So in pages starting on page 6, I go through the proposal, make a comparison on how it stands up to the applicable requirements. And as you can see, it meets most of those, and there are a number of variances that are required as we go through this. As you will notice, that there are some places where the standards are not met. Moving along to tree removal, they're requesting to remove 7 trees, mostly that are really located along the perimeter of the site. But with the site being as tight as it is, trying to retain any trees is really very, very difficult. So recommending that those trees be removed. When it comes to parking and loading, the city can only require 1 parking space per unit. So there will be more than that, probably about 1.5 maybe per unit. And then in addition, there will be parking that is available on Versailles Road. So that street is currently set up to accommodate parallel parking on both sides. So they would have some on-street parking available also, probably that they can share with River's Edge. Versailles Road is a private street, and so they will be participating with the Homeowners Association for River's Edge on the maintenance of that street. The applicant can describe a little more what their agreement and understanding is with the Homeowners Association. So I'll talk a little bit about the variance requests. They're requesting a 20-foot wide paved driveway instead of 24 feet. A 20-foot access easement where 30 feet is normally required. 17 square feet of front window glazing on the ground floor where 20 square feet is required. Up to 6 attached units where a maximum of 4 attached units is allowed. And lot coverage of up to 88%, where a maximum of 75% is allowed. Let me go through those. Before I do, just a little preface. The R24 zone is an old zone that we've had on the books for a long time. If you notice, when you look on the zoning map of the city, only this property in River's Edge are zoned R24 in the entire city. It was modeled after whatever Washington County had probably in the 80s. And at the time, R24, there was no minimum density, and so it was more or less envisioned for apartments, or it also allowed for detached single family. But it wasn't thinking about all these different flavors of housing that really have come more to the fore since that time. So because it hasn't applied to very many properties, and the city has a lot of other things it's been working on, this hasn't been a high priority to try and fix this zone to really meet what people are trying to build today. And that, I think, is leading in a lot of respects to the variances requested here. Also, River's Edge went through a similar process. Plan development also needed a number of variances to do what they wanted to do as well. Anyway, just a little background on this zone. So getting back to the first one, 24-foot width. This is a requirement that we have for driveways in parking lots. but it would apply to a parking lot that's maybe really busy, like in front of King City Plaza, where there's a lot in and out, parking on both sides of the driveway, people backing and maneuvering and so on and so forth, so the 24 feet is a standard for that. In this case, you can see this driveway is going to be pretty quiet. You're going to have some driveways, some garages backing out onto it, and then you're going to have some parking spaces on one side only backing out into it. So it's sort of a hybrid type of a street. It's almost like an alley, but it's still, because it's the only vehicular access provided, it's sort of a street as well. We think that under these circumstances, the 20 feet is fine, in particular because then it allows them to have the buildings more towards the perimeter so they can have a larger common open space area. So anyway, with the findings that I have in there, we recommend approval of that. Then the second one is a 20-foot easement for this driveway instead of 30 feet, which is normally required. So in addition, when we're talking about the 30-foot easement, that's also contemplating that you would have a pedestrian walkway in that easement as well, along with the driveway. That's why there's the 30 feet. In this case, they are proposing to have the main sidewalk circulation internal to the site. As you can see, this would be the sidewalk along the street that they're going to put in, and then these sidewalks would connect all the units. So there really isn't any particular need to have a sidewalk. There isn't any particular need to have a sidewalk along the driveway because the circulation and the focus is going to be internal. So we also support having, allowing this variance as well because of how they're providing pedestrian access help.
Can you clarify where on there the 30 versus 20 would be?
So it's right here, all the way around. So then if this is 20, so that this has to go 10 feet, then everything would have to move in.
Okay.
So you'd lose 20 feet in the center.
But we're talking about two different things though, right? We're talking about the 20-foot circulation around, and we're talking about 30 feet access, right?
Right.
So where would the 30-foot access stop?
Well, they're proposing that the driveway surface and the easement would be one and the same as far as width and location. With a 30-foot easement, that would mean that these houses couldn't be in the easement, so they would have to be moved back something like this. And then these would have to be moved in. So the idea is that normally if you had a 30-foot easement for the driveway like this, you'd have a 24-foot driveway width plus a 6-foot sidewalk. So they're providing a 20-foot width, which still meets the TDF&R standards, and then essentially providing the sidewalk access over here.
To the west, like what is this to the west of that driveway right now? Would that be a
This would be the property line, so there'd be a little bit of a setback between the paved.
It's the PG substation.
Yes, and then over here is PGE.
field?
PGE substation over here, and TDF&R.
My question is, aren't we talking about two separate things when we're talking about access at 30 feet? And we're talking about easement requirement at 24? Are we talking about the 24 we wrap around, but the access would be 30 only at Versailles? How deep? Or when we're talking about access, are we talking about 3 feet all the way around? It seems to me like access would be off of Versailles at 30 feet. And then your 24-foot requirement would be the rest of it across the way. Am I understanding that correctly?
First variance is for the physical width of the driveway,
24.
24, then it's reduced to 20. And then the second is for the width of the easement, the line, the paper.
The easement all the way around.
Right, easement.
Okay, I got it. I thought we were talking about access.
Right, it's an access easement,
Okay.
and at 30 feet, that 30-foot standard is intended to be accommodating a 24-foot wide driveway plus a 6-foot wide sidewalk.
Thank you.
So they're shifting things around to try and use this more efficiently.
When you turn off of Versailles onto this 24 feet, is that going to create, a bit of a two-type turn traffic?
I don't think so, and TVFNR and Pride Disposal both reviewed the plans and are satisfied that they can get access with trucks and whatever they need to get in
I
there.
measured our alley in my,
Yeah.
development, and it's 15 feet, and you can put two cars side by side easily, passing each other.
Yeah.
And we have, Pride coming down that
Yeah.
every week. You can see it visually.
Right.
The right time, place for this. What if the, curve at the top what if they were a little bit broader? So that the type C units actually had a little bit more space, because they are the tightest in there.
I'll let the applicant respond to that.
Okay.
He's
Got
on
it,
one,
okay,
so
you're
he'll
right,
be able to
okay,
answer
yeah, I
that.
was like trying to figure this out again.
I got one more question regarding the parking spaces. I think in the application it says 14, and you mentioned 14 of the garage spaces. And on the site plan it shows 15. But there's also an ADA requirement for one of the spaces to be ADA.
Mhm.
Are they figuring that maybe the 15 will end up being 14 once the ADA is identified? Because generally it requires.
No, that's included, so you see the place with the crosshatch,
Oh, okay.
and then the mark to the right there, that would be the ADA.
Okay, that would show up in the online site plan.
Oh, it did?
I got the site concept plan here.
That might be,
Oh,
Right.
But it does say 15, it just says 15 spaces on site plan that I have. So I'm just curious about. But, how many were required, versus how many it showed, and you answered that question, one per unit.
16 would be
And
required.
then the additional parking then goes per side.
You have some additional parking above the minimum standard provided on site, and then.
Any overflow goes per side.
Right.
So is there any no parking zones on Versailles, any restrictions? Because isn't it part of an HOA? Isn't Versailles owned by the HOA of Edgewater or River's Edge?
So there's an easement, and I know this property has the ability to use this easement, and again, I think the applicant can explain that a little better.
Thank you.
I actually have a question. So back to the parking spaces, it says in some of the documents that there's gonna be 2 ADA spaces, and then other parts that there's gonna be 1. And some of the plans show for 2, and some of them show for 1 ADA space.
I was operating under the idea that it's 1, but again, we can ask the applicant. Okay, then, the third variance is we have a standard for window area on the ground floor, a minimum of 20 square feet. The idea with the standard is that you don't have a row of houses fronting on the street that basically don't have any windows or anything other than a garage door facing the street. One planner used to call it the trick or treat test. If a kid can't figure out where the front door is, then maybe your house design isn't very good. And so that's part of the idea, and then also to just have some connection with who's living in the house and what's going on in the street, that it's a friendlier type of neighborhood. So with this one, we have some of the units that would exceed the standard by a fair amount. I think it's 36 square feet, but then we have a number of them that are proposed at 17. We think that small adjustment is okay because one, this is sort of a unique development, and there's so much orientation from the back of the house to really what is going to be this little neighborhood, and that's really where people are going to be congregating and oriented towards, as opposed to the outside, which is Pacific Highway, TBF and our fire station and a substation. So it's not like I mean, let's face it, I mean, the surroundings aren't exactly the best, and being more internally focused and focused south and towards the Rivers Edge neighborhood makes more sense. So we think this small variation, yes. Then the next one, variance number 4 is to allow the number of attached units to be more than 4 and up to 6. I think this harkens back to the statement I made earlier about the R24 zone not being very well suited to today's standards, and that maybe having some kind of a limitation if you're in a predominantly single-family detached neighborhood. 4 is probably a reasonable thing, so you don't have buildings that start getting too big. But in this case, ironically, they could have an apartment building with 24 units on it, and they'd be fine. So, anyway, this deviation is a minor one, so we would have 6 across and 5 north-south.
What makes the 131st and Fisher, zone? Is it a comparison to the two?
So 131st and Fisher, on the north side, it is R9, R12, sorry, that's right, R12, and then Edgewater is mostly R9, and then south is R9. So that standard you also find in those zones, maximum of 4.
Neighborhood mixed use there.
Well, then we have neighborhood mixed use, it's right on the corner of that undeveloped neighborhood, everything else.
Do we have any, zones where you could have 4 or more than 4 currently, that's not an apartment building?
So the R9 zone is still predominantly a single-family detached residential zone, is what you see in Edgewater. So the 4 max would apply there, and I believe it also applies in the R12, which still wound up being predominantly detached single-family residential, but I think we do have a few attached units here and there. Okay, and then finally, lot coverage. So lot coverage is a combination of the paved areas and the building footprint, at least as we calculated. And so with the lot lines going through the common wall, out across the driveway, and then including a little bit of the backyard, you can see that they have a fair amount of impervious surface total when you calculate it that way. And so some of the units would meet the standard, but some would be as much as 88% lot coverage, depending on which one you're talking about. Because they're providing above the amount of common open space that's required, we feel that this is, on the balance, we're still complying with the intent of this. So really, in a way, you're providing some open space that's more usable than making sure that each lot has enough lawn behind their individual fences or whatever. And so that we think that also complies. I have a lot of findings, of course, we have to go through with all the different, but I'm just trying to give you an overview. So the common open space requirement will be 500 square feet per unit, and they're providing 679 per unit. So we think that on the balance, we're meeting the intent. I don't think there's really much else that's particularly notable. You'll see, I just have to go through a bunch of findings just because that's what we need to do. But neighborhood circulation has a lot of provisions, many of which aren't applicable. Sorry, I don't know why I'm hoarse, because I feel fine. So we're recommending approval of the subdivision plan development, and we have some conditions of approval starting on page 23. Most of those are fairly routine, just getting final approvals from ODOT and reviewing agencies. City engineer will be involved, of course, in final plat and so on. And I think I'll conclude there. So if you have any other questions of me, otherwise we can turn it over to the applicant, and Ken Sandblast can give you some more detail about the project and then answer the questions you were posing before and anything else you have.
For clarification from me, when it comes to the lot coverage, you're talking about the individual lots per unit, right? So that's where it exceeds. So I know that common area is about 31% of the total 1..
They're not letting me undo my video.
So, you're saying that's what balances out?
In our view, yes.
In your view? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Always the part that makes me the most nervous about these things is the technology. It used to be easier.
Well,
to
good-
just
well,
have the paper plane.
Good morning. Good morning, Keith and Planning Commission. I'm not sure this is Ken Sandblast. I say I'm unmuted, but I don't seem to have a video. So I can speak if you can hear me, just confirming you can hear me.
Yeah.
At this time, I call for the applicant to present their proposal.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Ken Sandblast. Just again, confirming you can hear me, right?
Hear you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the time this morning. Up on the screen is also Ian Gallagher. He is with Habitat for Humanity, who's the property owner. I'm going to let Ian talk a little bit about Habitat's mission and goals. But before I do that, I'm just going to talk a touch about the history of this project. I started working on this property back in 2018, 2019, and the site planning of this has been there. Thank you. Good morning. Site planning has been going on, went on for about a year or two then, worked with Keith. And as I think I just heard Keith say, you know, this property is kind of the last piece in the area, and it's got the fire station to the north and the power station to the west and the highway to the east. So we've been working on a site plan this for some time, and then we paused because Habitat for Humanity, the West Side Habitat, merged with the Portland Metro. So it's now one entity. And so now we're working on it for them. And the site plan has been evolving since 2018, 2019. So what you see in front of you has a history to it. And then of course, what the result is some of the application of the R24 zoning and the net result with some of those variances that Keith spoke about. So I'm going to touch on some of the details of the project, but before I do that, I wanted to let Ian talk a little bit about Habitat and what they are as an organization and what they plan to do here. So Ian, please feel free.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Keith, as well. Yeah, so Habitat for Humanity is an organization many of y'all probably have heard of. We are an international nonprofit who has been around in the US for around 60 years. We have about 1,000 different affiliates of Habitat around the country who are working on the mission of building affordable housing and selling those homes to first-time homebuyers with an affordable mortgage. Here in Portland, we're one of the larger affiliates serving the greater Portland region. So King City, Portland, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Gresham, we're kind of serving the whole metro area. And we are currently building around 50 homes a year, trying to help meet the region's affordability needs. So we sell those houses, like I said, with an affordable mortgage set at 30% of people's income. And we are selling to home buyers making between 35 and 80% of area median income. So I think for like a family of four, we typically say currently that they're making like a baseline income of maybe $40,000 a year. Yeah, I guess like a little bit more about like the types of homes that we're building. We have been partnering with the local or regional green building verifier Earth Advantage for the last 10 or 15 years. All of our homes get Earth Advantage Platinum certification, which is their highest level of energy efficiency. Because affordable housing means not just like selling a home for affordable price, but also making sure that those long-term costs associated with heating your home or cooling your home are low as well. So there's all electric, energy efficient appliances in these homes, great windows, really well insulated walls, great air sealing. We're doing everything we can to keep energy consumption down. And make these homes as durable and healthy for the homeowners as we can. And then I think maybe like final piece I'll say, something that you'll see like with this particular design at King City is we're simultaneously trying to balance the desire to maximize the number of affordable homes that we're building because we see the very dire and great need in the community, but also creating like kind of a community space that'll like foster community and good relationships between the neighbors. And so we always try to incorporate some element of green space in our properties. Here you can see where we have kind of like the shared common area, which will provide like some opportunities for recreation, but also incorporating natural design into the stormwater management. So I'm excited about this project. I think that it really fulfills a lot of our values. We're excited to be doing our first project in King City and kind of expanding our reach out around the Portland region. That's a brief overview of Habitat and what we're doing. Happy to answer any other questions on that later. Ken, you feel like I covered everything?
Well, yeah, that's fine. I appreciate that. Maybe if people had particular questions about Habitat, this might be an appropriate time to pause and see if there's any about just Habitat in general or anything that Ian said. Apparently not. That's good. That's a good job, Ian. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the site plan itself and kind of drill down. As doing part of that, I'm going to answer some of the questions that or issues, I guess, that were kind of touched on by Keith during his staff report. Keith has been working with me and Habitat on this off and on since I started, 4 or 5 years ago. And the R24 zoning is it's one of the few places in King City that has R24 zoning. The property to the south, the River's Edge plat, the land, this Habitat land and the River's Edge land back in the 2014, 15, 16 range, when River's Edge was platted, they knew that the Versailles Road, it's a private street tract, and they knew that would ultimately have to serve this property because of its location, again, with the fire station and the power station and the highway. So the documentation and the platting of River's Edge and the deeds and documents that were recorded for easements accounted for the access of this property, not just as one property, but also as the future divisions thereof. So the Tract D private street that is Versailles has all the necessary legal documentation to provide access to this property. Mr. Markey, the HOA, he's involved with the HOA at River's Edge. He sent a letter to you as a commission, and I talked to him on the phone. He also attended the the community meeting that we had. So we've had open dialogue with him and answered his questions and tried to get a common understanding of kind of what's going on, because it is a private street. And so the maintenance of it will be shared. That's already in the documentation, that the prorated share of the number of units on this land plus the units on River's Edge, those kinds of things have all been put in place, including the parking and the sidewalk and the access easement for pedestrians as we've proposed it. So just as a kind of a summary statement about all of that, and I'll answer any questions you have when I'm done speaking, but in a nutshell, the answer is that it has been the documents have been put in place to provide for this property to develop. And then the property itself, as Keith touched on, we have an easement that loops through the property that is specific to the site, and that road that's on there for the shared drive that will serve the property, that is specific to the property. So it won't be part of any River's Edge maintenance agreements or anything like that. It'll be specific to the HOA that's this for these 16 units, as will the open space. So the open space will be maintained by the homeowners association for these 16 lots as part of this plat. So from that perspective, this project will be separate and distinct from the Versailles and the River's Edge. Those are separate properties from that perspective. The variances that are involved are probably, as I said a little bit ago, they're mainly the result of trying to mesh together the competing requirements. The density requirements as one is always a big one. In this case, to do this type of housing units where you get affordable ownership of the units, as I think Keith touched on, these are attached dwelling units. So therefore, to get the density, this isn't a maximum density plan. This is a minimum density plan. You probably picked that up in the staff report documentation or our narrative. So it's a minimum density, and the PD that we've proposed was the avenue with which that allowed that to even be achieved, because we were able to create the open space and deliver the kind of internal open space, common space that Ian talked about. Then, of course, there's access and on-site parking issues, and each of these, the east and the west units on this plan all have garages, individual garages. The ones on the north do not. That's why you see the parking that's more surface parking there. So we've exceeded the parking. Mr. Markey talked about that in his letter. I talked with him about that. We discussed the idea, and I think I wrote it into my written material that we submitted last week. There's the code, which we meet, and then there's just the ongoing parking management that happens in every community. So there will be parking. What another issue was access and parking associated for construction. And so I talked with him about that. One of the requirements of the documentation on the easements and access is to seek out construction access from ODOT to go out to the southeast, basically. So we will be doing that. It's up to ODOT to allow or not allow that, but we are interested in getting that to happen, and we will be asking that to happen because it's one of the requirements of the documentation for the use of Versailles Road. So again, that's the level to which this documentation goes. And so we're trying to actively manage this site to minimize the impact. And that's kind of final engineering and construction issues, but we're doing that. We're looking ahead on that already. I'm trying to think what else on the site plan itself. There's a power line easement. That's another factor that goes into this site. You may have seen on there's a power line running right along the south property line. And it took us some time to rework the plan here 6 months ago, because it ended up that there was a minimum 17-foot setback from the power lines that were out there to satisfy PGE. So that's why you'll see that gap of open space that comes along the south side of the property, because PGE required that there be a setback. And so again, I guess I'm just trying to describe to you and give you some context. The result of what you see before you has it's been worked through, I'm going to say, over a dozen iterations to try to get it to this point. And so again, these variances that we end up with are simply the result of that. And as I think Keith said, one of the variances for the lot coverage, the lot coverage gives us the ability to get this common open space and still provide, as you'll see on the plan, a little bit of a backyard for the units. So other than that, we've got the integrated storm. I'm probably going to be done talking. I've covered a lot of sites planning things. If you have questions about that, feel free. And then if there's other specific questions, short of that, we've read the planning staff report. We accept the conditions of approval, and we would look for your support. So please feel free to let me know if you have any questions.
I have questions. These work? The things, does this work? No. Okay. Oh, okay. Just so that everyone can hear me. What I'm asking is, are the power lines buried?
The power lines that are currently there they're up in the air. They're on both sides of the road. They're aerial, and they're, because of the transformer or the transformer station there, they're not the routine kind of feeder lines. They're more high powered lines. So that's why the setback was involved.
Does that have any health effects?
I'm sorry?
Does the fact that they're not buried have any health effects?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. We did not pursue that to look into the health effects of the lines. We were, of course, trying to site plan to deal with the fact of how close to those lines could we get. And we ended up with something very similar to what happened on the south side when they platted that. Across the street, there's another set of power lines, and they built their units in about the same spot. So no, I don't know anything about the particulars of the health.
This is just a general question. How does the fact that it's a private street affect its use by the public?
Well, I'll see if I'll give you a response and see if it answers your question. The street, it's the tract of land that was created in the plat for Versailles is owned by the HOA of River's Edge, so it's a private tract of land. Then that tract of land has an easement, several easements over the top of it. It has easements for the use of all of the owners of River's Edge to use that tract. It has an easement over it for this property and the divisions of these lots to use that tract. It has an access for pedestrians. I don't recall off the top of my head if it specified public pedestrians or if it said public vehicular access. My expectation is, my recollection is it was just a general statement that said vehicular and pedestrian access. So then, of course, there's an emergency vehicle access, and that's a public access. There's utilities easements over the top of it that are for public. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's just more detail on what that street is.
Thank you for that detail, because I noticed that the park that is being formed is considered public, but it's going to be maintained by the HOA on a private street. And I remember King City Park, there was always controversy because the public needed to drive over the private streets of Edgewater. So I want to make sure that, we're covered there, that, if I go down, if Billy goes down to play with Joey and Billy's mom has to drive down there and park on the street and
Right.
that it's going to be okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, in fact, you're reminding me by that comment that one of the iterations had the open space tract more on the north part where, let's just say it flip-flopped. There on the screen, you see the tract A. And so it flip-flopped the open space up internally more up against the fire station. And that was kind of rejected because of accessibility, right? And then, of course, the ability to have these units facing more residential, have the open space, even a buffer to the Riverside Road and the River's Edge. So that accessibility of that open space tract was also another component. So that your comment reminds me of that.
I'm trying to understand how it is the last part of your sentence. I'm wondering how we can have a public park in the middle of a private space like this.
Well, I would let Keith respond to that first, and then I'll take a cut at it.
Yeah.
Public isn't really perfectly defined in the code as to exactly what's meant by that, but, so for example, River's Edge is also considered, their open space is considered public. So I suppose it's not like it's under lock and key and you have to go through some entry gate to even get into it. So, people can come, and of course visitors can come see people at River's Edge and go walk there and so forth. And as I understand, a lot of people will go down just to walk the path and go back. So it's public in that it's not, exclusively just for those people and no one else can use it, it's fenced off or something. So people can kind of go in and out, but it's not public in the same way as it being a city park.
It's not being publicly maintained, right? We're not
Correct, and it's not
exploiting
being publicly maintained either.
resources to
Yeah.
keep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a semi-public.
Right.
public
It
things.
basically comes down to, right, or there's an easement that allows people to go onto the property, and that'd be
Sure, and just River's Edge, I'm sure gets Amazon shipments and everything like everybody else, and, you know, it's not, where visitors come and go, just like any other neighborhood.
Mhm. I think that if I could just add to that, Keith, I agree with everything you said. Publicly accessible is, I think, the terminology. And it's this as a private, either open space or street, it's more about the maintenance of it than it is about the driving on it. And so that the maintenance of the street itself, both the street on the site, as you see on the screen, and the existing Versailles Road is all documented for maintaining what happens when it needs to be repaired. So from the perspective of private, that's really what this is. That's one of the primary issues of what this is about, is the maintenance of these spaces or these streets.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking about, malls, they're semi-public spaces, but they are privately owned, and people can be thrown out of a mall.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody is hanging out here that people don't want. I suppose since it is a semi-public space, those people can be asked to leave. Is that true? I mean, because we're close enough to 99 here to
Mhm.
have, people coming and going from this spot. And we have a lot of people who look for parks for respite in the evenings and nights. And, what is what do we do here?
Well, I appreciate you looking ahead. Kind of like the management of parking. I mean, those are issues that come up after land use is long since gone, right? So that's a positive in terms of looking ahead as a city decision maker. The ultimate answer is that this is a private property owned by the HOA. And so at that point, as I think I just heard you say, I agree with you that if push came to shove, then I don't know what the laws of King City are about private property and trespass, but I'm assuming that that's the direction that this would go. I mean, again, I would defer to Keith and Mike on that kind of stuff.
That's exactly what would happen. Essentially, is the residents there would call in that there's somebody trying to camp on their private property, and then we'd have to go and remove them.
Okay.
I have two questions related to the variances. And the first one is, I understand that these variances all come about because of the restrictive space that you have trying to fit in 16 units. When it comes to the glazing, I don't see a big issue with that, but probably the background on that is I was looking at the floor plans, and you just can't get much more glass in their structure. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've looked pretty hard at that issue to try to minimize the glazing. And I mean, minimize the variance, excuse me, to meet the glazing standard. And we're down to the minimum right now, and it's only, I think, 2 units that are really in question, because we think we can even get, I mean, we're not just to that level of building design yet, because of course this all happens in a sequence: land use and then engineering and then building. So the building design work that we've done so far is of course fitting these to this specific land, but it's possible that we can get the glazing to maybe only be lot 5 and lot 12. It's just that we haven't got to that level of detail, but the architect involved with the project has definitely been trying to look at how to eliminate the variance for the glazing as much as possible.
Just one additional question regarding, you were talking about the context of how you came about with this design concept. And my own edification, since the 15 or 14 spots aren't necessarily required on building number 2, you conceptually have gone narrower on those buildings to provide more access on the north and south sides?
Yes. I mean, well, I gotta be careful, because the 22-foot width that you see for pretty much all of those internal, I mean, almost all the buildings of a footprint themselves, except for 5 and 12, are 22 feet. And the reason is because of, again, this is off the top of my head, but the combination of a garage entrance, a front door, the front door requirements, the porch requirements, and of course the glazing requirements. All of those things go into the width of a unit when you stare at it from the access side. And so the 22-foot width is something that was kind of a minimum. And then the depth of them, we were trying to, I mean, a big part of that requirement was we had to get an open space of a certain percent, and we exceed that, but we wanted that main tract there to satisfy the PUD, because the tract B is open space around the perimeter, so that'll be maintained by the HOA. But the tract A open space, we wanted that, since all the units are kind of facing onto it and using it as their common space, we wanted that to be a block of space that was big enough. So we knew that with the 24-foot drive aisle, or I mean, I would say we proposed the 24-foot drive aisle, and as Keith said, the garbage, solid waste, the fire, and then of course 2 cars can pass in the 20 feet. And so pretty soon, I'm probably not being particularly clear, but it's like a puzzle, right? And the pieces all kind of fit together, and this is what you got. So again, I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's the evolution.
Now that you mentioned block 5 and 12 and the restrictions there, I see that now. So thank you.
Yeah, I've been doing this for close to 30 years, and this has been one of the most Rubik's Cube ones that, and I guess I'm dating myself by saying Rubik's Cube, but it's been a Rubik's Cube for this one. And this is really the culmination of a lot of different issues that had to come together.
I have a couple more comments.
Sure.
I would like to see some covered parking, since the units don't have any garage. Just helps your car a lot. And I am wondering if the units, building 1, that would be the 2 centered units, I'm wondering if they will be ADA accessible. That is, further down the line. But I'm also looking at, wondering if we can possibly get some space on the northern drive, and maybe even the west side, using some roof ideas, eliminating the curb and kind of allowing a little bit more easement into the easement space there. And I'm also looking at the possibility of some permeable pavement. Sometimes doesn't do so well in the driveway, but oftentimes it is acceptable in the parking spaces. Because from what I understand, we're going to get some very intense storm events. Fewer of them, but they're going to be more intense. It's going to be flooding. You're downhill from everything here, close to the river. So those are my suggestions.
So I'll see if I can take those one at a time. Putting some carport covers up above like 6 through 11, I think was maybe your thought on that. And that is definitely something that could be considered, because again, that's more of a final design kind of an issue, but it's definitely something that Habitat can consider putting in there. So that would be something that, I don't know, Ian, if you have anything to add on that, but that would be my initial thought. And then the second one was ADA access, and the units are designed to have visitability. And use of the term ADA instantly brings into effect all the federal regulations and requirements that are involved with ADA that you see for, corners of public streets and whatnot. Visitability is kind of a threshold that's a step below that, but it's basically the same thing. It allows someone to get into this house without having to go up steps on at least one entrance into the house. And all of these units, in fact, all Habitat units that I'm aware of, are designed to provide visitability so that there will be access into the units without having to use at least one access in without having to use steps. The street itself, I looked, again, just some more details. I looked at changing that radius, and I looked at using those corners for parking spaces. We looked at using them for the solid waste locations. We looked at using those extensively. We were looking at every space we could find. The road curve that you see there at both corners of the property at the northwest and the northeast, that radius is dictated by fire access requirements. So the 28-foot inside radius and the 48-foot outside radius of those curves are the minimums that we can provide and still satisfy Tualatin Valley Fire. So we can't make them shorter. I can't shrink up the curve. And then, of course, if you look closely at our grading plan, we're doing grading in that upper corner because the site, it's pretty, I mean, overall, it doesn't have a huge slope to it, but to get this all to work, especially with the visitability, that corner at the northwest corner, that's where we're doing a little bit of grading. So there'll be a grade change right there. The property will kind of be pushed down, if you will, in that upper left corner there. And then to the stormwater and the pervious, for maybe some of you were around on the planning commission at the time that the River's Edge group went, 6 years ago or whatever. The soils out here are not the best soils with regards to, there's a term liquefaction that's involved with way down underneath the ground here. And so the idea of using pervious pavement to get water to go into the ground just won't be supported by the geology. And what I recall off the top of my head is in the geotech report. So that was one of the issues that kind of paused all of this when we were working on it several years ago, was just to make sure everybody fully understood what all that meant. And so the ability to do kind of water into the ground, infiltration basically, is not really an option for here. We're doing treatment, thank you for putting that up on the screen. We're doing treatment. And then, of course, that is being conveyed into the system that takes it into the existing ODOT system and takes it to the river. So we won't be doing any on-site infiltration. I think that knocked out the 4 things I remember. And Ian, do you have anything you'd like to add on any of that, visibility or carport covers?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning visibility. I should have added that to my spiel earlier. It's definitely something that we have factored into like the preliminary unit layouts for these homes. We try to make all of our homes, or as many homes as possible, visitable, where they have a no step entry, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom all on the first floor if possible. We didn't manage that on all the units here. I think we got maybe the 6, I think, middle units there. We managed to get a bedroom on the first floor. So that's really great for, I think a common misconception about Habitat homes, folks think of it as like a starter home. But in reality, a lot of our families will move into this home and live there, for the rest of their lives, and have multi-generational living in these homes. So there's a lot of folks who are aging in place in Habitat homes. So it's super important that we're designing our homes that way. And it does then really constrict us sometimes in how we're designing the site plan. So we were able to get that parking there at the north, and then like a no step entry into the north side of those homes, even though, like Ken said, there is a bit of slope to the site. So it wouldn't have worked if we had oriented things differently. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ken. And as far as carports go, I've never seen a carport on a Habitat development. It's something we could explore. I'll definitely jot it down and take a look into the costs of building and maintaining a carport. As with any builder, we're trying to figure out where to put our money to build the most and the best like affordable housing that we can. And so if we're going to put the money towards a carport, it might mean not putting it somewhere else. And so that's just something that we're going to need to look at and decide if that is going to provide more value to these homeowners than maybe another feature on the homes. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Are we talking about landscape yet?
We have a, if I heard you correctly, we have a landscape plan landscapes around the perimeter and also landscapes through the open spaces and the pedestrian access ways. And so we have a preliminary plan that's as part of our package.
I saw that, and I'd like to comment that I'd like to see some trees on the north side and also, especially on the west side. They will block basically, the fire station, but mostly I'd really like to see some trees blocking the, power station. And it also will give some very, very needed, shade to that west side. 'Cause
Yeah, thank you for bringing that graphic up. Thank you. And yes, I can see from what you're saying that the plan shows some tree planting along the east side, but we could definitely plant some in the west side. There'll be a slope right there in that upper west corner. So we'll just pick some trees that can fit given the grade that's going on there. But yeah, we can look at planting something along there as well. The other thing that just strikes me as an immediate thought is we have to pay attention to where the power lines are and what kind of trees we pick over there because that substation is sitting there.
Question, will Habitat for Humanity be the HOA administrator at the end of the day, or does that get turned over to another company? How does that work?
Yeah, it'll get turned over to another company. It does make me think of one other thing I should share, which is that we've adopted a permanent affordability model with our homes. This is based on research that has come out in the last couple of decades around community land trust models and ensuring that these homes stay affordable for generations to come. And so Habitat will own the land, and that prevents it from appreciating at the same value as other properties in the area. So the homeowners will own their homes, and they will have like a set level of property value appreciation. So they're still building equity, they're still building generational wealth and stability. But then if they do choose to sell that home in the future, the Habitat has the first right of refusal. So they would sell it back to Habitat, and then Habitat can fix it up, sell it to another home buyer in that 35 to 80% range. So that's a little bit more about our model. But as far as how the HOA functions, yes, that will be Habitat turns that over once I think it's like 75% of the homes I think are sold. Up until that point, we would be like the board of the HOA, but then we turn it over. And the 16 households would be paying into the HOA fees to and hiring a property management company to do all of that maintenance of the common areas and of like the shared building elements.
Another question. So is this dependent upon ODOT allowing access from the east onto Versailles from 99? Is that a requirement?
Yeah, so what we know about that so far is that there is no permitted access for Versailles to go. I think there's a gate or some sort of a post that's there now. But as I'm sure you're familiar with from your work on the Planning Commission, you have to have specific access rights granted. This is a pretty unique situation, at least in my experience, where you have the real highway and then you have this kind of unused frontage road that not even the fireman needs because he has his own signalized access onto the highway there. So it's this idea of maybe using it for or asking to use it for construction access is, as I said earlier, it's required for us to do that, which we will, because that would work fine as long as it's safe, right? But again, it's ODOT's, it's completely within ODOT's control, as I'm sure you guys have heard people tell you before. So we will pursue that, but we do not anticipate or understand that there will be any permanent access from this project or from Versailles into Highway 99 at all, at least not at this time.
Why is that? Why don't we have access there?
ODOT likes to reduce their access points to ensure that there's traffic flow, and they have their VC ratios that they want to try to meet, and order to meet those, what they do is they space those intersections out further so that they can maintain their speeds on those, the efficiency of the system, right? So they're shooting for efficiency of the system. And so in their aspect, they want to get as much traffic through as efficient as possible, so they want to space those intersections as far. From a city standpoint, what we want to do is maybe a little different. We want to have more intersections so we can slow the traffic down, so we can provide more access to neighborhoods. So it's, when you're dealing with ODOT, you have to think state
Right.
thoroughfares. When you're dealing with city, we can think more on the granular level on how we provide those intersections to slow traffic down.
The potential future projects for the city. Thank you.
Ian? Ian, I have a question for you. In your guys' planning for sites like this, and you're talking about selling the houses to people within a certain income range, have you guys over time kind of determined how many cars there will be for each house like this?
I don't think we keep records on how many cars the homeowners end up having, but they certainly will all have one car at least, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't have a number or an answer to that.
Yeah, it seems like to me that these folks would, have more than one working person. They have some teenagers, then they have a car, and to me, it seems like this is very inadequate parking. And I think that's a reason that people on the other side of the street, existing homeowners, have some concerns about parking. I really feel like this parking hasn't been addressed as it should be, and possibly it's not being addressed because of land conservation rules and regulations, where everybody in the state planning system just assumes that we're all going to take mass transit, and that's not really how the world's going to work.
Right.
So
Right.
I think these people that live in this little development should have, the appropriate number of parking spots just to, make their life easier. And then another thing that's caught my eye on this one is, I'm assuming that we're going to have some folks, living in these homes who have electric wheelchairs. And if you're taking your little electric wheelchair out, and you end up on that narrow street, I think things could get pretty exciting really quick.
Yeah, I can share about the accessibility question. As is mentioned earlier, we do take that into account. We frequently do have folks with accessibility needs moving into our homes. And so, like, looking at this site plan, you can actually see there is a path that you could take to the Versailles Road, which would be an accessible pathway on that internal concrete sidewalk. And then as far as getting into the homes, like I said, the 6 homes in the middle all have an accessible walkway from the parking right there into their home. And then the homes with garages, we've actually managed to maintain a slightly wider stairway as well to the 2nd floor. So if somebody were to move into one of those homes and want to retrofit it with some sort of accessible like stair system, that would be available as well. So I think we've done a lot to make both the homes and the site plan friendly for folks with accessibility needs.
Well,
The only thing
I appreciate what you guys do as an organization. I think you're just exactly what we need right now.
Well, thank you for saying that. Appreciate it. And we definitely have been doing our best to grow our work. As I mentioned, there's, you know, probably about 1,000 Habitat for Humanities around the country, varying in size from 1 or 2 volunteers who do everything and maybe build a house every couple of years to, you know, bigger affiliates like ourselves that are building 50 to 100 homes. We've grown a lot just in the 5 years that I've worked here. When I first got here 5 years ago, we had 1 project going with 15 homes. Now we've got 4 projects around the region. We had 100 homes under construction at one point this year. So we are seeing the need and we are trying to scale our efforts to help meet the need around the region. And it's exciting to be working in new jurisdictions like King City, and we're looking for opportunities and parcels of land anywhere we can to continue to scale the work.
Just to remind the Planning Commission that while we could encourage the applicant to provide additional parking, we really have no authority to force the applicant. So there's a thin line there that we need to walk.
Okay, well, we're in suggestion mode here. We're talking about cars of the future, which are going to be electric, hopefully. I'm going to suggest that you wire your homes, garages, and that you do provide plug-ins in the parking spaces.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We actually just been looking into that recently. We are definitely wiring the garages. It's super easy, costs a couple $100 to just throw a plug and a breaker in and a wire. So we're definitely doing that. And we're currently looking into what it would take to run some underground conduit, drop a couple of underground junction boxes near the parking spaces so that in the future, if residents move in with electrical vehicles, they could work with the HOA to install a charging station. And we would have the wiring already there. That's definitely a value that we care about and we're looking into. Haven't fully designed it yet, but we need to do some more research.
There are several parts throughout the document that talk about having 1 ADA spot and others mention 2. Can you talk more about that? Parking, yeah.
Well, I think that there was a version of this plan, in fact, almost, I guess, one that must have gotten into our turned in materials that had 2 ADA spaces. If there's a reference in our documents to 2 spaces, what we looked at was then we revisited it because we were trying to maximize the parking on the site. And what we found was that the requirements are for 1 ADA space based upon the calculations that are applicable to this project. So we reduced the number of ADA spaces to the 1 that you see before you now, because it maximized the amount of on-site parking for other, just say regular or non-ADA parking.
Residents who don't have a garage also have a guaranteed parking space in the back?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. The garage is a guaranteed parking space. Was that the question? I'm sorry.
Units and 40 spaces, so I guess the answer would be no, right?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. Was it?
Sorry, so will the residents who do not have a garage, will they have a guaranteed parking space in the back?
Yeah, those get designated to the units. So there'll be there's another Habitat project that's under construction. It's basically constructed, but they're doing the same very similar thing where there's a surface parking area and then it's specifically designated to the homeowners.
Just to be clear, there's 8 parking garages, correct? And then
There's
14 open spaces or 16 open spaces?
there's eight units that have garages 4 on the east and 4 on the west, and then the 2 at the top and the 6 in the middle. So there's 8 that have garages and 8 that do not.
There's 22 total spaces, 1 ADA.
Correct.
What I understood was every unit get an additional spot in the back area, the back part.
Like, would one be reserved for every unit?
And the answer to that is no, because there's 4 student spots.
Right.
But what he's saying is those extra spots would be assigned to the units, right? But somebody's gonna get left out.
So 5 through 12 would get assigned 1 spot, right?
Either getting 2 or having 1.
And then there'd be a couple open spots.
So there's gonna be 4,
Oh,
right?
yeah, sure.
I was thinking the C and D units.
also
Share
street parking.
one spot, yeah, but, I mean, just for ease of access to the home that they own.
I have a question for the chair. So our position here today, I'm new to this is my first land review. Our position here today, our function here today is to basically look at the variances, is that correct? It's not design review or anything, I mean, it's great that we're asking questions and, you know, because we don't have questions about what's going on in our community. Our basic function here is to look at the variances and decide whether or not to approve or disapprove, is that correct?
The subdivision and the variance.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's some design elements where the code has no particular authority to require one thing over another. So for example, we can talk about parking, the present day you have 2 per unit. We can only require 5, you know.
DTC, right? Does that dictate parking? The
Yeah,
community
we can
development
only
code?
require 1.
Per community development code,
No, per metro. No, per
per
state metro also.
state metro,
Okay.
So each unit is guaranteed 1 spot, but the homeowner, once they purchase it, they're not gonna be guaranteed a spot, it's still first come, first served.
Well, if I understand correctly, the units that do not have a garage will have a designated surface spot,
Okay.
1.
Okay.
So you would have some that would be designated, and then the remainder would be whoever uses it.
So that's correct. That's correct, Keith. There's, I believe, off the top of my head, I think there's 22 total spaces. 1 is ADA. So the 8 units there's 8 units with garages, and that's part of the spaces, right? And so then the designated surface space will be, 8 of those will be used specific to those 8 units that do not have a garage. And then the remaining spaces will be first come, first served, so to speak, because they won't be designated to an individual specific unit. I hope that makes sense.
I think I have one more question. I realize that you're trying to maximize this plot of land. Recently, here in King City, with wider roads, a big wide sidewalk, I've managed to see 2 cars cross all over the landscaping and actually ram garages. And like I said, there's some physical space from where the road curb is to
Mhm.
that garage that got smashed. And in looking at this design, there's no space there for somebody who's maybe had just 1 too many shots of tequila on their way home. That's just an interesting phenomena about this design.
Mm-hmm. I would say to you that I think I've seen, I don't know about the shots of tequila, but I've seen the experience of, you know, getting used to driving what this functions like with these units that close to the access road or drive is more of an alley access. And so that it's 20 feet wide. So of course the cars are traveling on the outside edge of that. So will the homeowner have to get used to making that turn? The answer is yes, they will. And that'll be part of the navigation that they make. What state they're in when they make that navigation is a different question, I guess, but they will have to make that turn, and it will function because we've looked at the turning templates, and with that 20-foot width, you can turn into the garage. And then, as I think you noted, the upper corners at the curves, those units up there, units the 5 and I think 5 and 12. Those don't have garages to get into, and those curves, as I said a little bit ago, are required for, and they satisfy the firemen. So the turning radius that's up there is more than adequate for someone to navigate in a car.
I just want to make one comment that, I really like the site plan. I like the homes, circling the common area, create a really nice community. My daughter lived in a place like this, and it was just wonderful to have a huge lawn that everybody could, enjoy and bring together.
Yeah, one of the threads I appreciate that comment, because one of the threads I liked about this was the connectivity of the pedestrian ways, so that all of the units could walk out that and walk onto and get to that space, right? And so that idea, and Keith touched on it during his comments about the variances, you know, typically it would be wider because you'd have that access for pedestrians, but we provided it internally, and it just resulted in more functionality for pedestrian access to get to that open space. So again, it's been quite the journey to get here, and there's a lot of positives about all of this. I mean, of course, there's some code related things that are the resulting couple of variances about the design of it, but overall, I've been happy with how it evolved.
I'm going to make another suggestion. I've been a site designer. The inside corners of the park space, you're going to want to curve those because people will cut those corners and create big mud holes.
Do you mean the upper right and the upper left, or do you mean down at the bottoms where you come off of Versailles?
The upper right and left.
Yeah, those are the ones I was just talking about that a minute ago. That they are the minimum requirements for a fire truck. So when cars navigate that, the car's turning radius and requirements are less than a fire truck's. So those radiuses. Okay, sorry, I may have misunderstood you.
Yeah, it's up the park. In front of Unit B, front of, no, let's see now, no, I don't have the numbers here. But it's just around the park, you know, how, people follow goat paths, and they don't turn at right angles when they're on the sidewalk. It's the sidewalk I'm talking about.
I gotcha. I think I'm following you. You mean what? You mean the sidewalk connections at the corners?
Yeah, people cut corners and then the big mud hole.
Oh yeah, no question. Yeah, no question. People will cut corners. I went to Oregon State a long time ago, and the whole quad is set up to follow the path of least resistance. There's sidewalks all over the place there because people. But this one is because it's such a short distance. I mean, if I'm following you, but to get from the northwest corner or the northeast corner of the project, it is pretty much a straight shot to come due south to get to the open space, if that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, but I think I'm talking about something just simpler. Just,
okay.
Instead of having right angle, having a 45, or just.
She wants an oval open space.
Yeah, the common space, Helen, you're talking about
The common space.
Yeah, I'm talking about the northeast and northwest corners of the common space.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was tracking what you were talking about. So thank you for clarifying.
Going forward, does anyone wish to provide neutral comment? Does any member of the audience wish to speak in favor of this application? Please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Margie Farwell at 16285 Southwest King Charles Avenue.
And I just want to speak in favor of the people who will be living in this area. Because these people, you know, if some people might think they're poor, they're not the quality of the rest of our town. These are hardworking, community-minded, they're fantastic people, every one of them that I have met. So 100% in favor of having that in our town.
Thank you. Does any member of the audience wish to speak in opposition of this application? May I approach? Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Jeff Markey. I live at 12144 Southwest Pond Lane, King City. I'm one of the directors of the 80-unit Rivers Edge HOA that abuts this property. And I'm speaking on behalf of more than 4 people, so if I can have a few extra minutes. I'd like to start with a statement, and then I can answer some of the questions that I've heard asked, at least my understanding of it. I'm here today to ask you to carefully consider my objection to the Habitat for Humanity development as proposed by Westlake Consultants. I believe this proposal is not in King City's or King City residents' best interest, and if approved, will cause substantial, foreseeable, and continuing conflicts between Habitat for Humanity residents and the surrounding communities. Westlake Consultants is asking for 5 variances. 2 of these are related to the ribbon road running along the perimeter of the property. I would ask you to disapprove both of these variances based on the fact that the hardship is self-imposed. The proposal shows 16 units with only 8 having garages and a parking lot with 14 spaces. Units without a garage will have no personal parking and must rely on parking lot availability. In other words, these future King City residents will not have a parking spot that is deeded to their property. No one can park in my garage. There are 3 similar developments nearby that have easily avoided this problem and have at least 1 garage per unit along with additional on-site parking. Denny Gardens is a Habitat for Humanity Westlake Consultants development in Beaverton. It's a 1-acre site with 16 homes, the same size as this proposed development. Every Denny Garden home has either a 1- or 2-car garage along with on-site parking. I'm sure you're familiar with Ponderosa Pines. Each home in that development has a garage and a driveway along with on-site parking. And of course, there's Rivers Edge, which is also zoned R24. Each home has a garage, a driveway, and on-site parking. All 3 of these examples show that safe, secure parking is possible and does not need to be sacrificed to develop the property. The hardship claimed by the applicant is indeed self-imposed. Now, if this were to be developed as proposed, I foresee the following 3 issues. First, Walk Score rates the area as car dependent, and there's so little parking provided that cars will park along the narrow 20-foot perimeter road. Owners will parallel park in front of their garages. I know this because I've seen it done at Denny Garden. You'll need every inch of that 24-foot code. Second, there is no nearby off-site parking that I'm aware of. Contrary to what's in the staff report and what's been said, there is no parking available on Versailles Road. Parking is limited to Rivers Edge homeowners. Non-resident vehicles parking on Versailles are towed. It would be a constant source of friction if Habitat for Humanity's residents' vehicles parking on Versailles were towed. I'd like to know, where does the 23rd car park? My 2 spots, where's that 23rd car park? And lastly, the world is moving quickly towards electrical vehicles. EVs are typically charged in a garage. This development, as proposed, where 8 units do not have a garage, makes it impossible to safely charge an electric vehicle. You cannot just run an extension cord from your home hundreds of feet to your car. You need a safe and secure place to charge your vehicle. Where does a resident without a garage charge their vehicle? And based on the earlier accounts, how does that work? Because electricity costs money. I would ask the Planning Commission to disapprove these two variances since the hardship is self-imposed. I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for the opportunity to speak today and for considering my objection to the two variances. I hope Habitat for Humanity, Westlake Consultants, and King City all revisit this proposal.
Could you please repeat the two variances again? It was, which two specifically?
Used to be here. 20 foot instead of 24 foot for road width.
Okay.
And 1 foot easement instead of a 30-foot
Okay.
easement. For those two variances, yeah. Now, based on some of the comments I heard here in the meeting, these lots are 22 foot wide, River's Edge is 20. And if I recall properly, 20 is the minimum. I'm not sure how the ADA applies to this development. There's no ADA parking at River's Edge, but we don't have a parking lot either. There's an easement in the southeast corner where the emergency access is, the River's Edge easement, that shows up on the maps that they're putting their driveway and everything over. I don't know how that affects the plan or easement with them building on it. With multi-generational homes, like Ian said, you're going to have more than one car per unit. And that ribbon road that runs along there, if you have a landscape company come in, right, they cannot park on Versailles. They have to park on site. Where would the landscape vehicle park while they're trimming the grass and doing things like that? They'll block that ribbon road. You need it to be 24 foot wide if they do it this way. And then the surface spots. I'm a director of an HOA. How do you enforce that? Right? I can't ticket somebody for parking in your spot, right? I mean, how does that work? It is not needed. I can have someone towed if they park in my garage, but I can't if they're in an open spot with my name on it, let's say.
Well, wouldn't the HOA be able to tow that? Wouldn't the HOA be able to tow that if you have your designated parking spot?
Maybe, based on the rules of the HOA. So that's all questions or statement I'd like to make. If anyone has any questions for me, sure.
In our discussion about public-private, and Versailles being a private, and this is land that is owned by River's Edge or something like that, that you are ceding to, explain that, and while you explain that, please let me know why Versailles is so strictly held there.
I can answer those questions.
Yeah.
So, the easement, as I read it, I'm not the expert, these guys are the experts, right? But the easement gives them egress and ingress access to the site. It does not give them parking on Versailles.
Okay.
They also, the easement says they have to pay their portion of maintenance for Versailles. So they can only use Versailles to get in and out of the property, not to park on.
Can that change?
Anything can change. Unlikely. It's as likely to change as King City building parking spots along Fisher Road, or the fire department, Halton Valley Fire and Rescue, to open their parking lot to these residents, or PGE at their substation building a parking lot for these residents to use. We bought the homes at River's Edge knowing we had this on-street parking or open parking for our development. It was never envisioned that someone else would want to park on our property.
I've never been down there. How how much of it is being used?
I don't know.
You had a community meeting, correct?
Yes,
And these, points were discussed?
yes.
And there was no outcome, or, was there an outcome from the community meetings?
Well, the community meetings just discussed the issue, and there was,
I know that you've had a conversation with developers, I
Yeah.
saw some of that written,
Yeah.
testimony.
and there was a community meeting, basically where we talked about this.
And the developer will have a chance to respond to what you're saying. So the developer will have a chance to respond to what you're saying in a moment, but
Yeah.
what can you offer to us as far as what was kind of settled upon, or your conversations with them? Was there any kind of a conclusion drawn as far as what would happen here?
With the residents or with?
With the Habitat Humanity property and the parking issue?
No, they've never addressed the parking issue. I mean, I would say from my perspective, is that they're doing just over the bare minimum, okay? So they have 22 spots, 16 units, that's only 1.375 per unit, right? So 3 units are sharing one spot, extra spot, right? If everyone gets one spot, then 3 units have to share one. They're starving that development of parking. And if they do that, and they expect to take all that overflow onto Riverside parking, it's not gonna work. I mean, in the future, what's gonna happen is we'll go through and dole out parking passes for our residents, and we'll have a towing company come in and tow anyone without a sticker. We have that problem today. We have commercial vehicles parking on Riverside, and that causes a problem. We have to deal with it. We can't call King City Police, it's a private road, right? So we have to deal with that. So parking on Riverside has always been an issue for us, and we spend a lot of time with those problems, and this is gonna cause another problem.
You mentioned 2 other developments, Den Garden
Yeah,
and Ponderosa Pines.
yes,
I'm not familiar with either one of those, but are those sites similar to this one, where there's
Yeah.
access only on one side?
yeah.
And what size of this property? This one's 1.08 acres, are they similar in size?
Benny Gardens is a 2.3 acre site, but only 1 acre is buildable. So it's a 1 acre site with 16 homes.
But are they able to utilize that extra area in terms of roadways and whatnot?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just trying to draw a comparison.
Right.
You brought these 2 properties as being
Right.
directly linked in terms of
Correct.
their situation.
yeah.
And when I look at this site plan, I see 16 units on a very tight space. I don't see where they could get 8 additional
Right.
garages into that space. But you're mentioning that the other locations
Mhm.
all have their own garages, and I don't see where that could happen on this site.
Going to Denny Gardens, they could speak to Denny Gardens plat better. It's 1 acre, 16 units, everyone has a 1 or 2 car garage, and there's additional parking on site. They're also 3 stories, not 2.
As far as our process here, looking at the variances, I don't know, I'd have to defer to people who have been on the commission longer than I have. But, if our scope is to look at the variances,
Right.
I don't know that parking and all these other issues might be outside of our scope, and that's something for us to discuss.
Right, well, the parking directly impacts that variance because people are gonna park on that road. So as a planning commission, I would say, don't approve the variance, make it 24 feet, because you're gonna have people parking on that road. They're not gonna have a choice.
But the parking spaces come down to Metro and state issued guidance, and not necessarily something that's in our control, I think. But anyway,
Right.
that's something for us to discuss. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Does the applicant have any rebuttal?
Thank you. I will see if I can, I took some notes here, primarily about the width of the access and the parking. It seemed to be the primary issue. Denny Gardens, that is a project, that is done by Habitat. That project was designed back in 2009 or 10. And then Habitat ended up purchasing it after 6 or 8 years. So the design and the layout of that site was not anything that we had involvement in when it was created. The reason that there's now on-site parking is because the units have individual garages, as Mr. Markey noted. There was an existing house that was originally retained as part of the project, and some open space, just like there is here now. And so, as I said in my original presentation, there's designated parking spots, just like there is in Denny Gardens, just like there is here, in addition to the garages. So, I'm not sure, I mean, to me, that's almost identical to what we're doing here. There's garages, then there's designated spaces. And to the point of additional, there is additional on-site parking. It's the additional 4 or 5 spaces that are above the minimum code requirements of 1 per unit. So if each unit has a garage or a designated space, it meets the code. Plus there's overflow parking above the code. The commissioner who noted that the state is moving in the direction of, trying to change how we do things or how we travel, that's exactly what's going on. And so there is these minimum parking requirements. While today they may be 1 per unit and we meet that here, there's already movement at the policy level at the state to move to even look at reducing those. So that is the direction with which land use planning is moving currently. In our case, again, we've provided the requirements of the 1 per unit and then more. And so the 24-foot width easement and the 30-foot easement and the 24-foot pavement, I want to make sure everybody understands that's posted no parking. Whether it's 24 feet wide or 20 feet wide, it's posted no parking because the fireman requires it. TVF&R requires it, and if I recall correctly off the top of my head, even the solid waste requires it. So there will be parking enforcement on the actual site itself, independent of anything to do with Versailles or River's Edge, because it's required. There'll be posted no parking for the width of that road. And so the parking that occurs on the site will occur in the parking that we have proposed it to be. There will not be parking on Versailles that is part of this project. If it occurs, then that's an enforcement issue, just like we spoke about with the enforcement of trespassing on the open space. That's an ongoing management of parking that happens when there's private streets or public streets if they're posted no parking. So while Mr. Markey and I talked about, I tried to draw the distinction between the objective meeting the code, which we do, we exceed it, and the subjective ongoing parking management that everyone has to deal with in communities, whether it's a private street or a public street, and who's parking there. As I said, we're going to have parking during construction. We'll have management plans for parking to make sure that we're not parking on Versailles. There's also a requirement that if we are able to get ODOT access, then we will post no construction traffic on Versailles Road. And that's part of the existing documentation. So we are working within the requirements and the structure of already what's there and within the city code when we present this to you. So it isn't the variances that reduce the 30-foot easement and to 20 and the pavement width from 24 to 20, they're not reducing the functionality of what is going to happen on this site. They're providing adequate access. They're providing adequate services with the design of it, as I've touched on. So I also heard EV parking. I'm just looking at my notes here, and then Ian, I'll let you add anything you want to add. Ian touched on that. That's already we started looking at that 2 or 3 weeks ago. So EV charging is going to be available. There's outdoor charging stations. They're more and more prolific as we, see things happening. They're happening in parking lots, and I think they're even going to start happening in rest areas. So outdoor charging is not something that can't be done. And then we also have said, we'll look at potentially carports within reason, and that would help that. The easement in the southeast corner, and then I think I'm about done. I thanked Mr. Markey for pointing out that our materials didn't include that. We submitted as our supplemental information, hopefully you've received and seen, that we saw it on there. That was an access easement primarily associated with the construction of River's Edge. It also provides for PGE to access, and also for the city of King City to access, I believe, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. Our driveway entrance is right there, so we don't see any conflicts or interests with the operation of that easement. In fact, it's basically was done for the construction of River's Edge, the best I can tell. So Ian, I don't know if you have anything to add. If so, great. If not, I'll see if you guys have any questions about what I've said.
No, I'm fine. I think you covered it all. Thanks, Ken.
So yeah, if you have any questions of me, please feel free. Otherwise, again, we would just ask for your support as presented and proposed, including the variances.
I have a couple questions then. So you acknowledge the fact that this project, the future residents of this project will not be able to park on Versailles Street, is that correct?
The existing easement, the existing easement that I read is for vehicular and pedestrian access. It doesn't specify parking. Access is it's a broad term, but it doesn't specify parking. It says vehicular and pedestrian access.
Okay, so no parking for these residents of this new project. What are you able to do in combination with the city to help alleviate some of the concerns that Mr. Markey has as far as posting signs and whatnot? Are there things that can be done to help alleviate those concerns for Mr. Markey?
I'm going to characterize, I'm going to generically characterize a good chunk of his ongoing concerns are the future management of parking, and it sounds like the existing management of parking of the HOA. And if that is the issue, that is an ongoing management issue. Maybe Michael or Keith have something to add about how the city assists its residents, but I think Mr. Markey did a good job of saying that it's private. So therefore their HOA has to manage that. This project will have to manage it as well. So again, Mike and Keith may have something to add. I don't know.
Automatic, we don't. As a city, if it's a public right of way, it's public. Everyone's paying money to utilize that space for auto, pedestrian, bicycle, parking included, right? So everyone's paying their fair share to utilize that space, in our opinion, as a city. So we don't discriminate between someone parking their car, truck, van, SUV. With some cases where we see a safety hazard, we'll identify that and say no trucks, vans, SUVs, or commercial, right? Because there's a vision corridor there that might be impeded. As Ken was saying, there are more standards coming out of the state right now, and sometimes you'll hear us talk about like home rule creep, kind of like what the state and Metro and other agencies dictate to us as cities, and kind of takes away some of that home rule authority, such as parking. Is home rule creep? Well, now there's the climate-friendly initiatives coming down in the very near future that remove all parking requirements and the ability for cities to basically ask for anything. So, you're hung up on a situation where there's 6 additional extra spaces than what's called for by the code. That's 6 more spaces than I can technically ask the applicant for. And that's now. In another 2 or 3 months, when the state finishes their climate-friendly initiatives, I can't even ask for that. So when you ask what the city's doing to mitigate parking, we're trying to plan for it, and we encourage people to try to provide space for at least 1, preferably 2 vehicles, but that's about the extent of our authority and our abilities on that. At some point in time, there might be enough economic push to support a parking garage, pay for their parking in that sense. I think that's where Metro and others want to push it.
At this time, I would ask for a motion to close or continue the public hearing.
I just got one comment before you close.
Please.
As you can tell, the parking is parking. So as Mike indicated, we're in a position where the city can only require one per unit, and like we're saying, it might even get reduced to being even no parking requirement at all that we can have for residential use. But that doesn't remove what we've been talking about. I mean, it's also reality, so certainly acknowledge that. On the two variance requests that Mr. Markey objects to, just wanted to point out that if we went to 24 feet, that technically wouldn't provide parallel parking, because it still would meet TVF&R's standard of having 20-foot clear. So it would have to be a minimum of 28 feet. So on a public street, you have to have at least 28 feet of width to have parking on one side. And I believe it's a minimum of 30, whatever River's Edge is, whatever Versailles Road is built to, it's the minimum for allowing parking on both sides. So I don't see that the 24 feet at least factors in technically for providing any more parking. And then as far as the 30-foot easement is concerned, we do have as I mentioned in the staff report, we do have the walkway located in a different place. So the 30 feet isn't, even if you have a 24-foot, 30-foot easement is not necessary, because they do have the walkway placed somewhere else. So I just wanted to highlight those two things while you're considering stuff, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions you might have before we.
Then at this time, I would like to ask for a motion to close or continue the public hearing from the planning commission.
I move to close the public hearing.
May I get a second?
Second.
Call for discussion?
Discussion. So what I see, legally, the development, that's our code, and that's kind of what we have to work with. But I wanted to ask Mike, and I wanted to find out, is it possible to work out an easement with either PGE or the fire department to use, I'm thinking of especially the north side, to give some parking? That would be a solution. So King City, it looks like there's a 5-foot outline, that's 5 feet from the lot line on the north side, and so that would take another 5 feet easement. Looking at the site plan.
So you're talking about essentially providing parallel parking on the north side?
Mm-hmm.
It's a design consideration. This whole project, and as Ken has been describing, is like squeezing a balloon. You push something one way and then you lose something else, and so there's always an equal and opposite reaction to anything you do here, because you really don't have any extra space to play with. So, if they did that, they potentially have a problem now getting 6 units north-south because they've brought everything down.
Right, yeah.
Maybe they could design the driveway differently, but, I'm just speculating. But I think the bottom line would be the common open space would be reduced. You would have to bring that top row of houses down.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Or you squeeze the open space from the street up, and maybe you get 4.
Yeah, maybe
you get 4 parallel
provide
spots.
kind of a pull-out.
The open space right now is over the required open space, right? At 30, you got 31%, and the minimum requires 20. Correct?
I'm sorry,
They have 31% dedicated open space right now, and I think the minimum required is 20. So they could squeeze some open space and get 4 more spots that, you know, intersect in the open space.
And you're also creating more non-permeable surfaces too, and stormwater problems and all that.
Right.
Pounds, right? So.
So, you know, it just seems like, this is a matter that, the HOA has to deal with, in terms of enforcement, because it's a private road. So really, the city has no control over that roadway in any way. And so it's a matter of the 2 developments working it out. As far as the PG side, I drove by there the other day just to take a quick look. In that PG area out in front, it's like, you know, they got a wide open space, but, you know, that'd be something that the developer would have to work out with PGE as far as creating spots and a lease agreement or some sort of agreement with them, and there's no guarantee that that will happen, and most likely it wouldn't. But, you know, as far as the matter before us, variance is just, you know, I understand the concerns. I mean, I would have the exact same concerns, I'm sure, but, you know, I would. But it's a matter of, I think the development's working together, and unfortunately, we're all living in tighter spaces. Parking is not a priority. That if, you know, we need to address it, but unfortunately, we have to do it from metro and state level.
Right. And one thing you could consider also is, we've been talking about what the city can require, and we can only require 1. But I think, you know, it would be possible let's say, if we give them, let's just say for sake of discussion, we prove it as we've recommended with the variance. There would be nothing in particular that could stop them from deciding that they could come up with a slightly different plan to provide some more parking. As long as they met the minimum still. They didn't pass any kind of a threshold. So like you observed, they have a little bit more open space than what's required. So they could possibly use some of that for parking if they wanted to. So, you know, you could potentially do something where they could come in with a final plan that had a little bit more parking, as long as they met the open space requirement. It would still be something we could go ahead and approve. But, you know, that's our main problem with parking. We're just not in a position to require any more than, they're already technically providing more than what we can require.
The development over there up on 131st, and I don't know the name of it, the one not too long ago on the west side. Is that Ponderosa Pines?
No.
Okay.
Ponderosa Pines is down at the park, near Castle Oaks.
Yeah, it's going in right now. Oh, and you're thinking about it, the 3-story building next to.
Yeah, well, we have a parking lot like next to the, what's the scenario there as far as garages versus outdoor spots? Is there a garage for every unit on that development?
There is there's almost 2 spaces per unit with that.
Almost 2.
Almost.
Possible that, would it be possible for, River's Edge to rent for parking spaces along that strip? You know, where you have like a parking permit, so that then there are only, and since there's going to be designated parking on, so I'm assuming if you purchase Unit A and it doesn't have a parking garage, then you get an assigned parking space as part of your purchase price. Like, I have friends with condos over in Jansen Beach, and they parking place for condos, period. And otherwise they have to scramble on the street. Just putting that out there as a consideration, work together rather than to fight this project, which I think has a lot of merit.
So what you're saying is the possibility of getting a permit from Rivers Edge community, like, renting a spot on the street from.
Yeah, it'd be the same with PGE, that if it's a private party situation, they need to work out the details in order to make something like that happen, but it's.
So again, that's beyond our.
Outside our.
No, I realize it's outside of our purview, but I'm just putting that out there as a what if to solve a potential problem. And then also, as time goes on, our forms of transportation are going to be changing. At some point, it may become moot that we don't have 2 parking spaces per unit.
For the purposes of what we're here to do today, which is evaluate the application on the merits of what it is, we have a couple variance requests for certain aspects of this development and a subdivision request to approve it. We can discuss and suggest and make all the modifications that we want to, but we're really limited by what is in front of us. So just to keep things moving along in a progressive fashion, I would recommend that we just kind of focus in on what we have in front of us and put our personal preferences aside and kind of look at what we can do here, what we have.
That I will call for roll call to close the public meeting as I haven't seen a second.
Walters. Aye. Commissioner Geisler. Commissioner Meyer.
Are you asking whether we're here or not?
Whether close it.
Aye.
Commissioner Tyso. Commissioner Bello.
Yeah.
And Chair Paulson.
Yes.
The 6 closed. Meeting is now closed.
I declare this public hearing closed on November 15th, 2022 at 11:39 a.m. Next question is, what is the pleasure of the Planning Commission? Do you wish to approve with conditions, or deny the application?
I motion to approve the application as is.
I'll second it.
We will call for a roll call vote to approve or deny the application.
The motion is to approve the application with the respective variance. Commissioner Walters, you want to, any discussion?
Any discussion before we move to the roll call vote? Hearing none.
Commissioner Walters.
Aye.
Commissioner Gautier.
I approve of it.
Commissioner Meyer.
Approve.
Commissioner Tyso.
Approved.
Bello.
Approved.
Chair Paulson.
Approve.
Favor.
When the decision notice has been mailed out, you have 14 days to appeal the decision to the city council. You must file an application stating the grounds for appeal to the city recorder and pay the application fee of $250 at 15300 Southwest 616th Avenue, King City, Oregon, 97224. Notice is normally mailed within 1 week following the decision. Moving forth in the agenda.
If you want to receive a notice of decision, make sure that we have your name and address, and we'll make sure to get you a notice of decision mailed out.
Thank you.
All those online as well, if you want to have a notice of decision, please put your name and address in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get it.
Thank you all.
Thank you. We'll stay on for another 5 minutes in case anyone wants to put their information into the chat, but we will go silent.
We're moving forward with the agenda.
Oh, yeah, sorry, agenda.
We need to, have a motion to approve the minutes from the August 2022, planning commission meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes. I'll second.
Any discussion about the minutes from the August 2022 planning commission meeting?
Can I just get, who's that, Commissioner Bellows and Commissioner Heisel?
Yeah.
Commissioner Myers, don't vote. Because you weren't there, right?
I was there.
Oh, you were?
At the work session.
Yeah, he was there. No, this is the 2020, yeah, you.
Oh, never
I
mind.
joined work session.
Never
I
mind.
was on Zoom.
Never mind.
Or was I on Zoom?
You put the sentence, we have it here.
You said it, didn't
Okay, can I get a roll call vote to approve minutes, or can we just do a?
Just yeah.
I as in nay.
Aye, okay. Any nays for the minute approval? Say aye from those who are present.
I didn't think so.
And
Okay, they are approved. Is there any staff report on upcoming projects that need to be discussed?
staff contact meetings for the master plan are being moved from December to January. We also have the December 7th, dinner for volunteers for city, that's planning commission, city council, budget committee, and staff. So welcome everyone to that. Good time to get together over the holidays and, outside of work. So, and I already told you about climate-friendly initiatives coming down the pipe. That is being dictated by Department of Land Conservation and Development. We filed, and we haven't joined the lawsuits that Hillsborough and others have done a class action on, but in the same side. Having these agencies continue their home rule creep on other cities, and it's just basically taking our ability away from
Providing quality of life.
just deciding what we want to do within our own borders, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, as these bills, House Bill 2001, 2003, the climate-friendly initiatives, and all of these regional policies and goals and everything compound on the local cities, it makes it more and more challenging for us to dictate how we go.
Is there a reason why you're not doing
Other than money and contribution rates, that's probably the only reason why we're kind of holding out. I think, but even then, it's probably only about $15,000 to $20,000 investment for us to join into the class action suit.
Yes, you can endorse it, correct?
Yes, yes. So we've reached out and said that we support you. We haven't jumped in and been named as a class party. Let the big boys fight it out first. If they need us, I guess we'll jump in.
You hold them down.
Yeah, they'll just, sit on us essentially. But,
One other thing about the climate friendly, we are talking about, asking for an exception for probably a couple of years, because what we wanted to do, if we have to do some of these changes, is fold it in with the other code amendments that we're going to need to make when we finish the Kingston Terrace master plan. We're gonna have a wide range of code amendments, and we wanted to just fold it in with that, and the state is requiring something to be done by the end of the year or by, March. So we're asking for an exception just to give us time to just put it in an orderly manner instead of trying to do a code amendment, or a code amendment Band-Aid thing, put it on, and then do another code amendment later.
turn around and do another one 3 months later.
I think our case is really good because we have no developable land essentially in the city now, so nothing really happens in terms of development.
There's no more plots of land similar to this one that have potential to be developed, or are there other little small?
There's two, I think,
Like,
that's it, Ponderosa Pines is the
Correct,
Bruce
those
property,
two. Which are there,
and, adjacent to the Bruce's is, Mr. Geisler's property and Mr. Laughlin's property, but neither one of them has expressed an interest to develop, and that's it. Oh, the bike place, so Randall's bike place, yeah, but that's commercial, limited commercial, so it's a different, animal altogether.
And talk about access issues with that.
That's a big problem with that one.
Probably one of the reasons it's still for sale.
Yeah, well, I think it's sold, right?
Yeah, because there's been some interest, some people have been around kicking the tires, but that's been.
I think it did sell, but it's just sitting there still. I think they're probably developing a plan for it, but about an acre and a half, 2 acres.
Yeah, it's the bike shop.
Just
Oh,
past,
okay,
just past the hotel, so that's. I'm gonna miss that bike shop though.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any commissioners reports? And I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting today.
I'll move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
It was approval and
All those.
approval? All in favor? We are closing the planning commission meeting at 11:48 a.m.